Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab, brought to you by CPA Practice Advisor, with your hosts, Randy Johnston and Brian Tankersley.
Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab. I'm Randy Johnston with co-host Brian Tankersley, and you can probably tell we're in the same room for a change.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's wild. It's like, what, 4 times a year we get to see each other, and here we are.
Yeah, and it turns out that with event season in full swing, we want to first report to you about the AICPA ENGAGE conference for this year. We were particularly interested in the Tech Plus channel, but I want to back up in the story a little bit because Brian and I were fortunate enough to fly into Las Vegas the night of Saturday, June 6th, and met on Sunday, June 7th with the 40 under 40, a lot of young CPAs coming up that are technology, I'll say focused, might be a way to talk about it, but very much enabled. And then a lot of the other thought leaders. So this Mashup experience, there was a nice number of people there. The sponsor on this was WriteWorks, and Derek Destin, who's the VP of Community for WriteWorks, was there. Great event, and we had very interesting discussions. So I thought maybe we'd talk about that just a little bit because...
In all fairness, the publication is owned by WriteWorks, so we're talking about our overlords, but they have never, ever given us any editorial guidance.
That would be true. And Isaac O'Banion, who is actually the current editor, ran the event for the first time. He did a nice job. Yeah. And first up was the preview of something that was announced the next day, the RISE 2040 project. Now, if you think back on visioning work for the AICPA, they originally had their first vision project, which spanned the years of 1997 through 2011. And then we went on to the 2011 through 2025 Horizons project. So we basically were kind of out of runway. Mm-hmm. And this new project is supposed to run from 2026 through 2040. And it was talking about a lot of trends. Long-term friend of mine, actually, Daniel Burris, who's a futurist and used to be a science teacher up in Wisconsin, helped with this worldwide visioning project. Daniel really talks about hard trends and soft trends, and that's how he predicts the future, if you will.
And 6,000 contributors across 25 countries. They collected data. They did the surveys in, seems like it was New York, Dallas and Heathrow. So they brought in people from all over the place, and then they also had facilitators that were people in the profession that actually went and handled that other places. So they're all over the world.
Yeah, and it turns out, the results that were published are very interesting in terms of what the needs are. And we actually had discussion throughout the day about these various topics. And we did a little bit of the same type of brainstorming, which I posted pictures of on LinkedIn. So you might have seen a few pictures there, which were where we broke up into 3 different groups and actually, went through a lot of that. But there were several different key items, great identity shift occurring, the future proofing through anticipation and global optimism, all in the agendas, a trust paradox that was occurring, as well as the AI as a strategic force multiplier, and that there was a bit of an artificial wisdom barrier here. But it is real clear that the profession is making a shift, and this document is to try to help drive some of that.
Well, and I will say that I thought it was insightful that they picked up that the AI creates this trust paradox and creates need for more trust instead of less, which is good because we're in the trust business. Okay. And so I thought it was a good thing. They had an interesting methodology. Tom went a little bit deeper into the technology side than I expected him to, but it seems like this is another change. Like it reminds me of when they were doing one of the previous visions, and they were talking about cloud. It feels like now AI is the new driver that's changed, and globalization are the two things changing it. And it seems like I think let's just forward ahead to the end. Okay, everybody still lives happily ever after in this one. Okay, but it's also one of those things where It's kind of like the life, if you don't adopt the new technology, you're going to end up where the people that smoke cigarettes with their tinkies at their desk and have 5 and 7 column paper are right now, which is not a good place.
Yep. The next topic that we covered was associations. And that was an interesting discussion because it was actually enlightening to me to note how many of the young professionals didn't actually know all the various associations and the state societies and provincial societies. It's not like they were clueless. I don't want to imply that, but they just didn't have a very good understanding of how things operated. And that was a bit of a fascinating piece on that to me. Even just trying to differentiate the alliances that are out there. It was fascinating because many in the room who I thought should have known that cold just didn't seem to know that. And I'm not criticizing them. It was just surprising, I think.
Well, it's so hard for the state societies to get, there's so many people that want to be involved with the states. It's very difficult for them to make big changes in their business model to accommodate new things. You think about the changes you and I've had to make with CPE, where we had to go out. We bought cameras, we bought microphones, we bought lighting, we've got green screens. And we get on planes about half as much or less than we used to, and that's okay with me. I don't like squeezing a 5-pound bag in a 2-pound seat. But it's very difficult for them to. They're having to totally reimagine everything because since inception, they've been based on person-to-person contact. And now with everything going digital and going to AI, it's a little different.
And, then we segued over into what I call the 4-letter word, AIPE, right? Because everywhere you turn now, it's AI discussion, often gratuitous AI discussion.
It feels like blockchain was about 10 years ago. When blockchain and crypto were gonna make everybody's teeth whiter and make us all more attractive to members of people that we wanted to be attracted to, and it was just everybody was just going to be hot and rich, which that was all going to work out.
Yeah, and I think you know us well enough that we're not anti-AI or anti-PE, but everybody's talking about it, and there's still a bit of a frenzy. And I can't quite put my finger on what's going on, but I do notice a bit of a frantic response from many. And Brian and I have talked about that a little bit, trying to understand why. I don't think it's a fear factor.
But I think you pointed this out correctly to me yesterday or the day before. I was thinking back to my experiences when I started taking accounting firms paperless in the late 90s. And one of the things that really resonated that you said was that there are a lot of people that are ready to retire and they put it off because of the pandemic. And now they are choosing to sell out. And because they set their buyouts back in the good old days, they're unfundable. And so they're having to go to PE to get the money they want. But then the PE says, okay, fine, we're going to force technology in here. And again, that's good. The forcing of the technology is something that's been needed anyway, because the senior partners at a lot of firms, it seems like when you hit that stage in life, you don't want to change anything because you're afraid you're going to mess up the machine. But the problem is that we end up underinvesting, and then the talented young people don't want to come here because they don't have the technology. So it's it's been an interesting ride, but there is a lot of uncertainty. And I think some people are stoking it for their benefit to get people to sell that might not otherwise.
Yeah. And it could be a bit of a catch-22 also. Yeah. But you are correct that one of the tipping points I think that is occurring is if you are late career, I think the professionals are looking at it and saying, I've got to learn all this AI stuff. And, I'm not sure I want to change my life to do that. It may change it for the better, but I don't want to do that bit of learning.
And in all fairness, the accounting profession also kind of has a self-confidence problem with respect to technology, because they, it's not something that people get up and get excited about, and they can't talk to their neighbors and brag about it. But they can sure talk about, we went to St. Thomas and we spent the gross national product of India flying, riding a sailboat across the Caribbean together as a family. And it's just a different thing. It's not something they get excited about.
Yeah. So there were two other main topics, and one of those was returning to office. And there was a bit of discussion about how that shook out. Few in the room had 100% virtual. Most had some sort of a hybrid. And the most common response on that was like the middle 3 days of the weekend, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, were kind of in office.
Well, I talked to Dan Hood from Accounting Today at length today, and he actually said that they're in the office in New York City 4 days a week. And, that's for a lot of those people that live out in the burbs, that's a commitment, 2 hours each way.
It is a big commitment. So we did talk about that and why that part of the culture was, I guess I'll say, returning. And then we closed up with a little bit of cybersecurity. And we are concerned with the AI threats against cyber. We've talked about that in the episode on Claude Mythos. And, there's many things that have been happening, including the pullback or clawback of Fable, Claude Fable.
Well, the federal government said that classified Fable under ITAR, the International Trade in Arms Regulations. And so basically they said, okay, if you're not American, you don't get Fable. And so at that point, Anthropic said, okay, nobody gets it.
Yeah, that's kind of the way it shook out. So that really led then, because unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way we should talk about that, Brian wound up, covering other engagements for our K2 business.
And I was so torn by that too, because I'd been on the committee at Engage for many years, and I'd been there since before when it was Tech Plus, and so I'd been there 10 plus years, and I hated to not be there, but at the same time we had good clients that needed service, and they were going to do something without us if we didn't do it, and we were going to lose them. So I got on airplanes, and it was a good week, but it was exhausting.
And it turns out for me, this was my, depending on how you want to count it, 40th year of speaking at AICPA Engaged, the prior tech conference and so forth. I spoke in 86, not in 87, and all the years since then.
Okay, and I do want to dispel a rumor that's out there, because there's a rumor that you're retiring, okay? And it's my understanding that the rumors of your demise are greatly exaggerated.
I would say that's true. I've told you several times, I want to see AI running on quantum computers. And we know quantum's not going to arrive here in 2026, but there is some promising technology in 27. But if it happens in 27, I don't think I'm going to stop then either. So I did get the privilege of watching Wesley Hartman and Chris Ortega run a workshop on using Claude for Claude Code and some other things. They did a nice job, and that was an interesting piece. But then that led over to the afternoon opening keynotes. And they ran a town hall from the MGM theater, and Sue Coffey and Lisa Simpson and Eric Askerson and Mark Cozio were all there, as well as the new chair, Jan Lewis. And beautifully done town hall. I actually picked up a lot of pictures, and Brian and I have talked about some of the content there, and that was all good. But then from there, it became even more of an unfolding, really a well done piece. But it didn't take long. We were out of that and into meetings with top level executives from the big publishers, and it was kind of back to back to back for me with the exhibit hall and everything else that day.
Talk to me about the speaker reception that they do every year. What I used to refer to it as the Barry and Eric show, and now it's the AICPA chair and Eric Askerson from CPA.com, and the Mark and Eric show.
Yeah, and it turns out there were, as you have seen in the past, many influential people in the room. Again, the speakers are invited, a lot of the new accelerator groups in there.
Most of the consultants to the profession.
Yes, so it was a broad range. And the topics covered there were good, and realizing we'd just had the town hall, so heard a lot of that type of information. This was a little more of an intimate discussion, which was good and very solid. And, I hate to say it, I don't drink on those type of events when I'm going to speak, but we closed the place down. So, we stayed there till the people were shooing us out and saying, we're going to close this room up.
I really regret missing that meeting in particular because it's some of the best networking I get done every year. I had about 4 years ago, I had a friend that had a daughter that was getting ready to make manager at EY, and she was having a hard time getting her application through NASBA. And I talked to Sue Coffey over dinner, and I said, "This is not a slacker doing this. This is somebody for real," and it got handled. There are things like that you can get done in rooms like that are amazing.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. So it turns out then, I wound up with Tech Update on that Tuesday morning, and one of my instructors out of K2 came in, Lavesh Shatlani. He's really brilliant. And so we tag teamed Tech Update, and it was a pleasure watching him do a Copilot agent demonstration. And you could just see the eyes light up across the room because many people didn't know that in Copilot, you could have access to Claude or OpenAI and, integration with the Microsoft suite and so forth. And I think...
And still have the indemnification and still have have all that proprietary data not used to train at all.
And it turns out that, I was watching because he was demonstrating and the eyes were going like big wide. And it's like, these people have not seen this before because they've been on this path of ChatGPT or Claude, and they just aren't really thinking about it in this new way. That was really a blessing. Standing room only in that room, and I did appreciate that. But, spent the afternoon really on the show floor, and we will talk about these exhibitors in other sessions, but that show had approximately 200 vendors on the show floor. And I tried to spend enough time, Brian, that I talked really to everyone there. I think I might have missed one vendor where they just seemed to always be gone when I was there. But
well, in all fairness, though, there are a lot of vendors there that are like PFP vendors and tools for family office and other things. So it's not an apples to apples comparison with where we are scaling new heights. It's a bigger conference, but it's a different mix, if that makes any sense.
That is true. And it was interesting to see how all of the vendors were lined up because all the bigs were there. Wolters Kluwer and Thomson Reuters and Intuit and Xero. I mean, I can just keep going because every big vendor that you would be interested in was on the floor, including new vendors like Instead. And, all of the 1040 work paper products were, it was really an interesting thing to be able to walk through that. Well, the next day, I was lucky enough to do an AI prompting course in the big room, and it was standing room only for about 900 people, probably something like that. But it was one of those like, boy, that really felt good when we were done. But it's not so much talking about me. All these different sessions were, a pretty big deal this year to get done. And there were, lots of different tracks. Obviously, as you just identified, at least 9 different areas represented on that. And, many speakers and so forth. Reported attendance here was around 6,000 people total. And I thought it was interesting in the thought leader, Mark and Eric show, as you referred to, they stated we've got 6,000, but their goal is to try to make that show 10,000 people.
Well, you've already got the National Tax and the NATS, National Accounting and Auditing Technical Seminar, and the PFP folks, and there's so many massive advanced estate planning. You've got so many and controllers, and then you had the traditional practitioners, which now has incorporated tech. And the story, I think, is we're talking about the tech, but it's wild to me how the tech is de-emphasized, and yet it's the story.
And it lives everywhere. And if you want to use, the AI word again, AI was pretty much everywhere. So overall, other guests from main stage were, pretty impressive. Ryan Reynolds was one of the guests, along with the now retired CFO of Costco. That guy was brilliant. I've talked to a lot of industry CPAs. That guy was just like, wow. No wonder Costco was successful.
Yeah.
Because he was part of that culture. But, very stunning, good things there. So again, I don't want to take away from any of the things there, but overall, a good thought leader event and a good AICPA Engage. I thought it was a good use of my time. And, I was glad that you could be there for a little bit. But for the moment, that's kind of a bit of a summary. We don't often do what I'd call news shows, if you would. This one will feel like that. And we've got another couple similar here, simply because it is conference season. So I think with that being said, we probably ought to call it a wrap.
Well, viva Las Vegas.
Indeed, indeed. So we appreciate you listening in, and we'll speak with you again very soon in another accounting technology lab. Good day.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. We'll be back next Saturday with a new episode of the Technology Lab from CPA Practice Advisor. Have a great week.